Indian students are going abroad in record numbers to study. What is it about a foreign education that's attracting so many of our students, and why are they really headed there? What's the kind of experience that they would like to gain? Well, we're now going to speak to somebody who knows the mind of the student, knows the world of academia as well. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Jane Hollander, who's Vice-Chancellor of Deakin University. Thanks so much, ma'am, for taking our time to speak to us. I know that you've had quite a whirlwind visit, and so this, of course, time very precious to us. Now, like I said, Indian students are warming up, ma'am, to study abroad. Every couple of years, there's some statistic thrown at us at how this has been a record year as far as students going abroad. What do you believe a foreign student, how do you believe a foreign university experience molds a student that, so many really wanting to get there?
Well, in my experience, I've worked in a number of places across the world. What I find is that, you can be a very clever and hard-working person in your own country. But if you do aspire, particularly in the 21st century, to having a wider view, you need to go out and look back at who you are.
Right.
And the thing I notice most from students wherever they go to in the world, from wherever they come in the world, Australia, the UK, the US, Europe, China, India, if they go out of their country and try and deal with difference, learn more about their own internal resilience, they come back with a wider view. A wider view must be important in the 21st century.
Right, and that's of course very key, a wider view, and this is perhaps the time where the world could use more of our youngsters who have these open minds. Now, Australia is supposed to be one of those countries very cosmopolitan, to use a cliche, a melting pot of cultures and all of that. How do you see the Indian student fitting in?
Okay, so Australia and India, of course, have a number of things in common, democracy being probably, for me, the most important thing they have in common. Right. Cricket, people always talk about our obsession, our mutual obsession with anything that is a competition. Right. Cricket just happens to be one of them. Right. And then, of course, the English language. And the English language remains, to this day, the unifying language of education, of business. So those things give us that potential. Australia is reasonably multicultural, or probably, if you look at Europe at the moment, one of the most multiculturally successful countries in the world. And Indians fit into that very well, I think. They understand us, they understand the democracy, they understand the bureaucracy, because of course we both, as as Commonwealth countries, take this from Westminster, and we understand systems. What do Indians like most about Australia, I think, is scale, big sky, big sky, interesting cities that work.
Right. You left out the love for Bollywood.
And then, well, no, what do Australians love most about India? It must be, besides beating you at cricket, and then, and not to underestimate the culture that India has is the great differentiator. You can walk across just the city of Delhi and see 5 or 6 or 100 different cultures, and it is so completely different from, to an extent, the uniformity that Australia does have across all of its cities, just in accent, whereas here, the many religions you have, the many ways. I was talking to a young student the other day, said, first time she's vegetarian, first time in India, and she said, they asked me veg or non-veg. I've never understood that I was the majority. It's great. And isn't that a difference that India has above every other country in the world?
Right. I think we need to learn to celebrate those differences a lot more. Now, something else that you see as you walk around our big cities, Delhi for instance, is the presence of foreign universities. Increasingly more and more of them are setting up shop in India. Just recently we had Salman Khan of Khan Academy speak to us. So, they're now launching their portals and their platforms in Hindi. Deakin's been here, of course, for many years, and perhaps it's fair to say is one of the first movers as it comes to in this space. What do you believe it is about India that is sort of ticking all the right boxes, for people like yourself?
The future. 1.2 billion people, one of the youngest population in global terms, a democracy, a nation with growth, a nation that has just elected a Prime Minister who appears to be very inspirational, who appears to understand what the big 3 things that need to be done to educate the population, understanding that India will be a knowledge economy. And people, global citizens are attracted to that. It's an interesting place to come. It's also, as the world has moved from the west to the east into this part of the world, the nexus of China and India, Indonesia, the big three populations, if you exclude the United States, that's a very interesting part of the world to grow. The rising middle class, I think, and in terms of what that will give to markets and to growth, make this a very, very attractive place to be. And then, of course, you get into India, and the chaos and the colour and the movement attracts most people.
Right, the argumentative Indian, not argumentative for nothing. Professor Jain, a couple of years ago, there were all these attacks on Indian students in Australia that made headlines. Of course, there was a lot to it than just met the eye. But what do you believe were key lessons learned for Australia, for people like yourself?
Yes, and I think as time has passed, we all need to reflect back on that. And certainly for Australians, it was a wake-up call about standards and about understanding the responsibilities of when you do give someone a visa to come into a country and study. You do need to make sure that whatever they're studying, that the promise has been made. And we learned that lesson the hard way. It was a very difficult thing. I think media called it as they called it. People were unhappy and were in the streets. Is Australia safe or unsafe then becomes the question, because a lot of it was around the safety of students. And if you look at the data, Australia is one of the safest places on the planet. A young student once said to me, it's just so boring here. Everything closes at 10 o'clock. Now that's a slight exaggeration, but it is a very highly regulated, highly governed and safe place when you do relative comparisons. But what we as Brand Australia need to do, exactly as Brand UK, the British Council there, the United States, and any country, and India, as India becomes a knowledge economy, there will be a net intake of students who are non-Indian into your country. The responsibilities we have are to standards. Families who pay fortunes for education expect their children to come home with a standard of education which will guarantee them a job, and the value of their family will be improved. And we can never step back from that. Australian universities pretty much united on that now. I think the more universities that come and join and get into India, the better. Standards will go up, particularly for Australian universities and their promise to Indians. We need to hold true to that. If we don't, we will lose.
I can assure you that's one of the most candid and assuring remarks on the question that I have heard. But if I could just flip the question on its head, to all those Indian students who want to say go and study in countries like Australia, what is their responsibility? What's the kind of homework and preparation that they ought to do?
I think that's the question. When you are going to go outside your country, usually it's going to be quite expensive. Many will be fortunate and get very good scholarships. But even if you are offered a great scholarship, you need to think about why you're going. Now, if you're just going to get away from mum and dad, that's a really bad decision. Just go down the road to a different university. If you're leaving the country, what is it that you want to come home with? What is it that you wish to go there? Are you going prepared to see something that is so different to your life experience? If you're only going to stay with your own culture, with your own friends, don't go. If you go to Australia, meet Australians, go and have a barbecue, learn to surf, do some of the very peculiar things Australians do. In the same way, when Australians come here, they learn to Bollywood dance and to go to all of your incredible arts culture that you have here, your incredible science culture that you have here. So I think deciding first that they're going somewhere to learn about things is the most important thing. And then do your homework and pick a place that suits some of your needs. Pick a course that you think is going to be useful to your future. And then when you get there, make sure that you get involved with whichever institution. It doesn't matter if you're in the United States, the UK, or Australia. Make sure you make contact with the university. Make sure you go to the orientation. Make sure you learn about the morals and the social mores of that country. What is done? What is not done? In the same way, when Australians come here, we're very particular and very clear about how they relate into Indian culture. You have your social understandings, your social etiquette. It's important to understand that. You may not like it. We have no idea. That's not the point. Whether you like it or don't like it is irrelevant. That you understand that there are differences of culture is the key learning for the world.
Right. That is, of course, a key learning for the world. We could sort of learn to respect differences, and the word tolerance has now become a much abused word here, but that's really what we need. We need to be more tolerant.
I like to think of resilience, being resilient to hearing, you know, eating different food. You know, people, oh, I don't eat, you know, don't eat curry, this generic statement about one of the great cuisines of the world. Well, try something, you might be surprised. In the same way, go and look at something, you might be surprised. Think of a different way of learning. And if I think of some of our students who come to Australia, the way education happens in Australia is slightly different. It's much more problem-based. It's not rote learning. You have to get into the classroom and learn to think about a problem and then go and learn the physics or then go and learn the history. Now that's a big change. The people who understand its change and embrace it, the world becomes their oyster. They excel, they get high distinctions, they go on to great careers, and they are the great beneficiaries of an international education, and you would never not have that exposure.
Right. And that's, of course, you know, one thing that we're lacking in India, because we are now here at a system where if you don't max all subjects in school, you're going to miss the top few colleges or educational institutions. You know, the Prime Minister goes to, say, Germany and says, I love their system. They're spending 2 days in the classroom, 3 days on the shop floor. So would you agree that there's a lot of learning that happens outside classrooms all over the world? But, you know, in India, we still need to wrap our head around
some of that. Yeah, so that is an interesting point. We often have parents who will say, well, you know, why are there only 3 hours of contact on this day in this subject? But of course, what is then going with that is what the self-learning, what you're doing to explore the issue, and then doing some of the things. One of the things that we do at the university I work at is sending our students out of the country to do their industry work in a culture that is foreign to them. So we've just got a couple of Indian students are going to Alaska, and you think, an Indian student is studying in Australia, in the middle of Melbourne, and is about to go and spend a semester in Alaska.
Wow.
What could they possibly learn? Well, if you're doing environmental science and you think of the world and where we're going, of course you go and look at Alaska. So, of course, they're buying anoraks. Their parents have been calmed. It's a very interesting and safe place. Imagine what they're going to bring back to India when they get here. This incredible experience that they have had where they've learned about an industry in a different country. One of our students, as you would know, has come back to India and is working in Indian journalism now before she goes back to India, back to Australia for the rest of her course. So now she has this great juxtaposition of when she's in Australia working with journalists there, having worked with journalists here, and the worlds are different. That's a great learning, you know, something that probably we weren't privileged to have when we were at university. I was talking to someone last night who said if only he had had that when I was a young kid. But, you know, and I said, well, of course you succeeded anyway. That's not the point. It's using your opportunities that are available at that moment and using them well.
Right. I'm running out of time, but tell me, how do you see this space growing over the next decade or so? What will change from where we are today? What are the new opportunities that you believe students will sort of look back and say, I wish I had these opportunities from where they are today?
Well, I think everyone has to be digital. We all need to be highly technical. And I'll go back to one of the things your Prime Minister said in a recent speech when he was in Australia, and his concern about the education of getting literacy and numeracy into the bottom of the pyramid, if you want to put it, people who at the moment don't have access. And our big driver, I think, as a global community, is that we need to educate people, because the jobs of the future, the problems of the future are going to involve science and technology. So keeping mathematics, making sure we get our people educated and numerate and literate, and I include digital literacy in that, is going to be one of the grand challenges. If we can do that, they will look after themselves. And, you know, you can't wish for more for any family, that they are able to care for their own family and to create their own wealth and to create their own community. Right. That's the grand challenge for India, as it is for China, your vast populations of billions as it is for Australia with its small 23 million.
Right. I think what's reassuring is the subjects like science usually sort of have come naturally to
well, of course, your great
so
triumph. You know, your
absolutely.
mathematical skills are legendary. In fact, I have a number of academics at Deakin who will only employ Indians because they are such good mathematicians and have that almost genetic base that they have to understand mathematics.
We have to make sure, the challenge here is to make sure that we can keep leveraging that kind of advantage,
and keep your advantages against the competition.
Right.
Because everyone will shortly be looking to India as a competitor. And you will eventually be doing your own knowledge economy. People will come here to be educated in a way that at the moment the diaspora is going out and getting their education and then coming home. What I've noticed of late, over the last 18 months or so, more Indians are going out to get education and then coming home.
Back, right.
5 years ago that was not the case. They didn't come home. Now you have this wonderful advantage that they are coming home. How will the community, the Indian nation, leverage off that skill that you are now getting back?
Right. Perhaps it's part of the evolution of a society, you know, that they start coming back and we're being called the next Silicon Valley and all of that.
Wow.
And hopefully with the points that you're making about digitization and the need to sort of get digital, we will sort of have a scenario where we do become that knowledge economy that you're talking about. But thanks so much for taking our time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for your interest.
Thank you.